Chapter 1. The Last Thread. The day I was meant to begin a new chapter of my life, everything unraveled. As Lucas and I prepared to sign our marriage certificate, a sharp gasp pierced the air. My twin sister, Clara, collapsed onto the ground. Chaos erupted. My parents rushed to her side, their voices filled with panic. "She's fainted. Someone call for help." Within minutes, they were gone, my parents, Clara, and even Lucas, all heading to the hospital. "We'll be back soon," my mother said as she hurried past me, but the words rang hollow. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I waited for hours. Calls to my family went unanswered. My messages sat unread. Even Lucas didn't bother to check in with me. I was left standing in the registrar's office, alone. As the evening fell and shadows stretched across the room, I made my decision. Picking up my phone, I typed a message to Lucas. "It's over. Let's not pretend anymore." The phone rang immediately. "What are you talking about, Mia?" Lucas's voice was sharp, indignant. "This isn't the time for one of your tantrums." His anger barely registered. I hung up, dialed my mentor, and gave him my answer. "I'll take the position. I'm ready to leave." That night, I packed a single suitcase, a decade's worth of memories reduced to a small pile of belongings. When I returned to my parents' house, it wasn't for comfort, it was for closure. The housekeeper, Andrea, greeted me at the door with a raised eyebrow. "Oh, it's you." I thought it was Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. I ignored her thinly veiled disdain and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. Bedroom might have been too generous, a term. It was a storage room, barely large enough for a single bed and a desk. This had been my space for 10 years. Inside, I dragged a battered suitcase from beneath the bed and found my old sketchbook. It wasn't filled with photographs or cherished memories, but with drawings, crude depictions of a family of 4. Each year, I had drawn a new one, hoping to capture the love I craved but never received. Now, those drawings felt like a cruel joke. I threw them into a metal tin, lit a match, and watched them burn. The flames consumed more than just paper, they consumed the last remnants of my naivety. Andrea's voice cut through the silence. "Still playing with fire, Mia. If someone finds out, they'll never let you live it down." Her words barely registered. Before I could respond, the front door burst open, and my parents arrived with Clara in tow. Their laughter filled the air, an unsettling contrast to the emptiness I felt. "What's that smell?" my father barked, his eyes narrowing at the burning tin. Without waiting for an explanation, he grabbed a basin of water and doused the flames, soaking me in the process. "Have you lost your mind? Do you want to burn the house down?" Clara, now seemingly recovered, erupted into laughter. "This is priceless. Mia, you look like a drowned rat. I have to post this." My mother's voice followed, cold and detached. "Mia, Clara's laundry is still sitting in the bathroom. Wash it before it piles up." I walked to the bathroom, my clothes still clinging to my skin. Clara's voice trailed after me. "And don't forget, use cold water. My clothes are delicate." The icy water stung my hands, already cracked and raw from years of frostbite. The sensation was familiar, but it didn't hurt as much as the weight of 10 years of neglect. When I returned to the living room, Lucas was there. Sitting comfortably beside Clara, he had arrived with snacks, Clara's favorites, of course. "You should rest," he said, placing a blanket over her shoulders. She pouted, leaning into him. "Carry me upstairs." Without hesitation, Lucas lifted her in his arms. "Mia, grab another blanket and follow us." That night, I stared at the calendar on my wall. May 21st. The day I had chosen for its significance, for love. But it was clear now, in this family, I would always be the outsider. Tomorrow, I would leave, not for 2 days, not for them, but for me. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Spotlight. The morning after my decision felt oddly calm. My resolve to leave, though bittersweet, gave me clarity. Still, the chaos around me hadn't settled. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from relatives asking about the marriage certificate. "Let us see the happy couple," one relative wrote. Before I could reply, Clara beat me to it in the family group chat. "So sorry everyone, I fainted yesterday, so Mia and Lucas couldn't sign the certificate. My bad." I clenched my jaw as the responses poured in. "Oh no, Clara, are you okay? Poor girl, Mia, you should have waited." One brave soul dared to ask, "Why didn't your parents take care of Clara? It's unfair to disrupt Mia's big day." Lucas jumped in quickly, his words thick with misplaced chivalry. "It doesn't matter when the certificate is signed. Clara's health comes first." Clara chimed in next. "Lucas is such a sweetheart. I'm so lucky to have him in the family. I stared at the messages, their warmth and camaraderie mocking me. Even distant relatives seemed more concerned about my feelings than my own family. My grip on the phone tightened as I scrolled through their words of pity disguised as kindness. Are you upset, Mia? Clara's voice was a feigned whisper, laced with fake concern as she appeared at the door. I glanced at her briefly. No. Her face twisted in mock confusion. Wow, no temper tantrum. No sarcastic comment. That's not like you. She leaned against the doorframe, studying me. Are you finally learning your place? I didn't respond. Instead, I turned back to her laundry, still damp from the cold water. Well, she continued, undeterred, you should smile. It might make you seem less miserable. By the time dinner rolled around, the day had stretched long enough to dull even Clara's taunts. I sat at the table, quietly picking at the rice in front of me. The dishes were a kaleidoscope of vibrant red chilies and spices, foods that Clara loved but tore through my stomach like acid. Clara, of course, noticed. Oh no, you're not eating anything. People might think we starve you. She reached across the table and plopped a heap of oily peppers onto my plate. Super delicious. Try it. The moment the smell hit me, my stomach churned. I excused myself quickly and ran to the bathroom, where I retched violently. The memories hit me like a wave. Clara's years of slipping peppers into my food as a cruel joke, ignoring how my body rebelled against it every time. When I returned to the table, my parents' faces were sour. Do you have to ruin every meal, Mia? My mother snapped. You've completely spoiled the atmosphere. It won't happen again, I murmured. I didn't look at them, not wanting them to see the fire simmering in my eyes. One more week, I reminded myself. Just one more week. Well, you'll be relieved to know that you can skip family dinners, my mother added coldly. If spicy food is such an issue, you don't have to join us anymore. I nodded without a word. They thought they were punishing me, but they were setting me free. The night passed without further incident until I heard Clara's scream echo through the house. Who ruined my stuffed bunny? I peeked into the living room to find her clutching the mangled remains of a plush toy. It had been ripped at the seams, its stuffing spilling out like snow. My father's face darkened. Who did this? Andrea, the housekeeper, stammered. I swear it wasn't me. Clara's eyes locked on me, her fury blazing. It was you. I know it was you. She lunged toward me, hands reaching for my throat. Clara, stop. I managed to push her back, but not before her nails raked against my skin. She stumbled, her dramatics dialed up to 11 as she crumpled onto the floor in tears. Look, she wailed. She hit me, in front of everyone. I stared at her in disbelief. I hadn't even touched her. My father stormed toward me, his fury palpable. How dare you, Mia? She's your sister. His hand lashed out, the sting of the slap echoing through the room. The pain wasn't new, but this time, something in me cracked. I didn't cry or argue. I simply turned and walked back to my room. Their voices followed me, Clara's sobs and Lucas's indignant ranting blending into an incoherent hum. Alone in my storage room, I pulled out a small piece of paper from the metal tin under my bed. It was a drawing of a little girl with a bright smile, holding hands with her family. That little girl was me, or at least, the me I had once hoped to be. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it away. That life didn't exist, but another one was waiting for me. Somewhere far from this house, far from Clara, far from Lucas, I would find it. Chapter 3. The Last Goodbye. The morning light streamed through the tiny window of my storage room, cutting through the silence. Another day in this house, another day of pretending. But this time, I felt different. This time, I had a plan. As I walked into the kitchen to grab breakfast, the tension from the night before hung in the air like a fog. My mother, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, barely looked up. Clara sat beside her, scrolling on her phone with a smug expression. The evidence of her so-called injury was a band-aid on her arm, pure theatrics. Good morning, I said, not expecting a response. You've got some nerve, my father said gruffly as he entered the room. He didn't sit down, didn't meet my eyes, just loomed there like a shadow. After last night, you should be apologizing to your sister. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. You're right, I should. Clara looked up, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Wait, what? I turned to her and smiled, a tight, forced thing. Clara, I'm sorry I pushed you. My tone was calm, devoid of any real feeling. It won't happen again. Clara blinked, startled by my compliance, before regaining her composure. Good, she said, drawing out the word like she had won some great battle. Now that we've cleared that up, I'll be heading out for a few errands, I said, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I didn't care what they thought. Today wasn't about them. I spent the day gathering the final pieces of my departure, copies of documents, last-minute supplies, and a quiet goodbye to my closest friend Lena. She hugged me tightly outside her apartment. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and pride. "I have to," I said simply. "Good. You deserve a fresh start, Mia." She pulled back, holding me at arm's length. "Just promise me you'll keep in touch." "I will," I smiled. "A real one this time. Thank you, Lena, for everything." When I returned home that evening, the house was unnervingly quiet. I stepped inside and saw the housekeeper, Andrea, rushing toward me. Her face was pale, her hands wringing a dishcloth nervously. "What now?" I asked, already tired of whatever drama awaited me. "It's your sister," she stammered. "Her stuffed bunny, she's still upset about it." I rolled my eyes. "Andrea, I didn't. She's in your room." Andrea interrupted. Lowering her voice, "She's looking through your things." My blood ran cold. I marched up the stairs and flung the door open. There was Clara rummaging through my suitcase, her hands rifling through my neatly folded clothes and personal belongings. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharp and cutting. Clara didn't even flinch. She pulled out a small box from the bottom of my suitcase, the one containing the amulet my grandmother had given me, and held it up triumphantly. "This," she said, waving the box in the air. "You value this more than me. It's pathetic. That's none of your business. Put it back." My voice was low, dangerous. She smirked. "Or what? You'll hit me again. Poor Mia, always the victim." Before I could stop her, Clara opened the box and pulled out the amulet. With one swift motion, she snapped the delicate chain in half. My breath caught in my throat. "Clara, no, now we're even," she said, tossing the broken amulet onto the floor. Something inside me broke. The grief, the anger, the years of being overlooked and trampled on, all of it surged to the surface. Without thinking, I slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed in the small room. Clara stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek. "You hit me?" she shrieked, her voice laced with both shock and indignation. My parents burst into the room moments later. My father's face turned red with fury, and my mother's expression was a mixture of horror and disappointment. "You've crossed the line, Mia," my father shouted, grabbing my arm roughly. "How dare you lay a hand on your sister? Did you see what she did?" I yelled back, pointing to the broken amulet on the floor. "She destroyed the only thing I had left from Grandma, but they didn't care. They never cared." "Mia," my mother said coldly, her voice like ice. "You need to apologize. Right now." I stared at her, then at Clara, who was now crying dramatically in Lucas's arms. He had arrived during the commotion, of course, and wasted no time taking Clara's side. "You're unbelievable," Lucas said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You don't deserve a family. You don't deserve me." I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I don't deserve this." I pulled my suitcase from the corner, zipped it shut, and walked out of the room without another word. This time, no one stopped me. Back in my storage room, I sat on the bed, clutching the broken amulet in my hands. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of release. This was the end, the last goodbye. Tomorrow, I would leave. For real this time. As I folded the last of my clothes into my suitcase, my mind wandered back to when it all began. My parents hadn't always treated me this way, at least, that's what I wanted to believe. Growing up, they had been strict but fair, dividing their attention equally between Clara and me. But Clara was always louder, always brighter. If I achieved something, she would achieve something bigger. If I struggled, she would thrive. And my parents, perhaps exhausted by Clara's constant demand for attention, found it easier to focus on her. Somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing me altogether. When I was 9, my grandmother, who had been my source of love and comfort, passed away. Clara didn't cry at the funeral, but I did, sobbing inconsolably in the corner. My mother's voice still echoed in my memory. "You're embarrassing us. Pull yourself together." That was the first time I realized I couldn't rely on them. Downstairs, I heard Clara's voice drifting through the house. She was laughing with Lucas, as if the events of the past few days had never happened. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped into the hallway, ready to make my escape. But, as I descended the stairs, I paused. Lucas's voice was soft but firm. "Clara, you know I can't keep covering for you forever. Mia's not stupid." "Oh, Lucas," Clara said with a dismissive laugh. "She'll believe whatever you tell her, she always does." The anger in my chest burned hotter than ever. Covering for her, what had Lucas been hiding from me? Chapter 4. The Final Departure. The house was eerily quiet as I descended the next morning. My suitcase rolled softly behind me, and I avoided the creaky spots on the wooden floor. For once, I hoped to leave unnoticed. But before I could leave, Clara's voice stopped me. "Going somewhere?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. I turned slowly. "Why do you care?" Clara shrugged. "I don't. But Mom and Dad might." Her casual cruelty stung more than it should have. "What is it, Clara? Why do you hate me so much?" For a moment, something flashed across her face, anger, jealousy, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "Hate you? Don't flatter yourself, Mia. I don't hate you. I don't see the point of you." Her words hit me like a slap. "And Lucas? Why does he care so much about you?" Clara's smirk widened. "Oh, Lucas. He's been in love with me since the day we met, didn't you know? He settled for you because I told him I wasn't interested." I felt the blood drain from my face. Clara stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "You're just the consolation prize, Mia. You've always been second place." Her words broke something inside me. Without thinking, I shoved past her, threw open the door, and walked out without looking back. As I opened the front door, the cold morning air hit my face like a wake-up call. I paused for just a moment, looking back at the house that had been my prison for 10 years. Memories flashed in my mind: Clara's mocking laughter, my parents' cold stares, Lucas's indifference. This place had taken so much from me, it wouldn't take anything more. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The train station was busy, a stark contrast to the suffocating stillness of my family home. I clutched my ticket tightly as I waited for the train that would take me to the airport. My mentor had arranged everything: a flight, a place to stay, and even a small welcoming committee at the Research Institute. For the first time in years, I felt like someone believed in me. I settled into a seat near the window and watched the city blur past as the train began to move. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew who it was: Lucas, my parents, maybe even Clara. None of them mattered now. The city skyline shimmered in the distance as the train sped toward the airport. My mind raced with Clara's words. "He's been in love with me since the day we met. You're just the consolation prize." Had it always been so obvious? Lucas's indifference toward me, his eagerness to cater to Clara's every whim, was it love? Or was it Clara's ability to manipulate everyone around her, including him? I thought back to the early days of my relationship with Lucas. He had been charming, attentive, and patient, or so I thought. But there had been moments, small cracks in the facade, where I felt like I was competing with Clara. When Lucas invited her to movie nights, when he asked her opinion on gifts he bought for me, I told myself it was just his way of trying to include her. But now, those memories felt tainted. When I reached the airport, I found a quiet corner to sit and wait for my flight. My phone buzzed again. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked it to see a message from Clara. "You're really leaving? Don't think this means you're better than us." I smiled faintly, deleted the message, and blocked her number. She could keep her venom. I was done drinking it. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I spent the hours thinking about what lay ahead: a new country, a new job, a new life. It felt surreal, like a dream I didn't dare wake from. When I arrived, my mentor was waiting for me at the gate. Dr. Callahan was a kind man with a sharp intellect, and his warm smile was the first genuine kindness I'd experienced in weeks. "Mia," he said, shaking my hand. "Welcome, we're thrilled to have you here." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions bubbling under the surface. We drove to the institute, where he gave me a quick tour and introduced me to the team. Everyone was welcoming, their smiles genuine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. The weeks flew by as I threw myself into my work. The research was challenging but rewarding, and the fast pace left little room for anything else. Slowly, the memories of my old life began to fade. One evening, as I sat in my small apartment reviewing data, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mia." The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost pleading. It was Lucas. I stayed silent, letting him stumble over his words. I wanted to apologize, he said finally. I was wrong. About everything. Please, just come back. We can fix this. I laughed softly, the sound tinged with disbelief. Lucas, I said, my voice calm, there's nothing to fix. Whatever we had is gone. But I love you, he insisted. No, I said firmly. You don't. You loved the version of me that stayed silent, that bent over backward to please you and my family. That version is gone. I hung up and blocked the number. Months passed, and my life in the new country began to feel like home. The project I was working on made significant progress, earning recognition in the academic community. I felt accomplished, fulfilled, and, most importantly, free. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the news, an article caught my eye. The headline mentioned a local business tycoon embroiled in scandal. The man in the accompanying photo was Lucas. I read further. His family had been caught in a web of financial fraud, and their business empire had crumbled. Lucas, desperate to save face, had taken out high-interest loans he couldn't repay. The article detailed how he had fled to avoid creditors. I set the phone down and took a long sip of coffee. The news didn't spark any emotions in me, not anger, not satisfaction. Not pity, it was as if Lucas belonged to a life I had left behind, a story that no longer mattered. 1 year later, I was invited back to the city for an academic conference. It felt strange to return, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The city looked the same, but I felt like a different person walking through its streets. After the conference, I attended a friend's wedding. During the reception, a mutual friend pulled me aside. Did you hear about Clara? She asked. I shook my head. I hadn't thought about Clara in months. She was conned by some guy pretending to be rich. Lost everything. Your parents' company went under trying to cover for her, and now they're living in a rundown apartment. It's all over social media. I nodded politely, unsure what to say. My friend studied me for a moment. You don't care, do you? I smiled faintly. Not anymore. Later that evening, as I stood by the window of my hotel room, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The city that once held me captive now felt distant, almost insignificant. Chapter 5. A clean break. The city skyline glimmered in the distance as I packed my bag. Preparing to leave the place I once called home for the last time. The academic conference was a success, and my presentation on our research had garnered attention from scholars across the globe. It was surreal once. I had been a girl who existed in the shadows of my family, and now I stood in the light of my own accomplishments. Before heading to the airport, I stopped at a small cafe near the conference venue. It was quiet, the kind of place where you could sit undisturbed. As I sipped my tea, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number. Hesitating, I opened it. Mia, it's Mom. Please, just hear me out, we need you. Everything's falling apart. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. I had expected this, yet seeing her message still tugged at a part of me I wished I could bury. I typed out a response, hesitated, and deleted it. Instead, I left the message unanswered, placing my phone face down on the table. The barista approached with a soft smile, breaking my train of thought. Everything okay? I nodded, returning her smile. Better than ever. At the airport, as I waited for my flight, I spotted someone familiar sitting a few rows away. It was Clara. Her once polished appearance was gone. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and the vibrant, confident aura she had always carried was replaced by a sullen expression. She hadn't noticed me, and I debated whether to approach her. Ultimately, I decided against it. Our paths had diverged long ago, and there was nothing left to say. As I boarded the plane, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Back in the bustling city where I now lived, life continued to move forward. The Research Institute became my haven, and my colleagues became a second family. Over time, the memories of my old life faded into the background, replaced by the joy and fulfillment of building something meaningful. One afternoon, as I reviewed data in my office, Dr. Callahan knocked on the door. Mia, do you have a moment? I gestured for him to come in. Of course, what's up? He handed me a letter. This came for you. Thought you might want to open it yourself. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The handwriting was familiar, my father's. Setting it aside, I finished the task at hand before finally breaking the seal. The letter was brief, almost desperate. Mia, we're sorry for everything. We've lost so much, and we realize now how wrong we were. Please come home. We need you. Love, Dad. For a moment, I sat still, letting the words sink in. But instead of pain or anger, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Some doors were better left closed. Years passed. My work gained recognition, and I was invited to conferences and collaborations worldwide. I met new people, made friends, and even found love again. It was unexpected and tender, built on mutual respect and understanding everything I had once thought impossible. One day, as I walked through the park with my partner, a familiar face caught my eye. It was Lucas, sitting on a bench, alone and disheveled. He looked up and saw me, his eyes widening in recognition. He started to stand, but I shook my head gently, signaling that there was no need for words. I turned and walked away, my partner's hand warm in mine. The past was behind me, and I had no intention of looking back. That night, as I sat by the window of our apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars, I thought about my journey. The pain, the rejection, the struggles, they had shaped me, but they did not define me. I had built a life of my own, one filled with purpose and love. Chapter 6. Ghosts of the Past. The years rolled on, and life fell into a rhythm of work, exploration, and quiet happiness. My partner Ethan was a steady presence, someone who respected the boundaries of my past while encouraging me to grow into the person I wanted to become. We traveled, laughed, and built a life that felt like it belonged entirely to us. But the past has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lena, my oldest friend and one of the few people who had stood by me during the darkest times. "Mia, something's happened. Call me when you can." I immediately picked up the phone, dialing her number. She answered on the first ring. "Mia, I didn't want to bother you, but I thought you should know. Your parents, they're not doing well." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Their business collapsed completely. Remember how I told you that Clara got scammed by someone she thought was a wealthy investor, and your parents lost everything trying to bail her out? They're now living in a small apartment, picking up scraps to survive." I gripped the phone tightly, the news hitting me harder than I expected. "And Clara? She's not the same. After what happened, she's become reclusive, even bitter. She blames her parents for their downfall." "It's a mess, Mia." I took a deep breath. "Why are you telling me this, Lena?" She hesitated. "Because I thought you might want to know. Whether you care or not, they're still your family." At the phone in my hand. The life I had left behind was crumbling, but it no longer felt like my responsibility. Still, a small voice whispered, "Shouldn't you feel something? Pity? Sadness?" But all I felt was relief that I was no longer part of their chaos. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably it was from Clara. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for several minutes before finally opening it. "Mia, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I don't know where else to turn. Things are bad, worse than you can imagine. Mom and Dad are struggling, and I don't have the means to help them. I know we've had our differences, but we're still family. Please, if you have anything to spare, it would mean the world to us. Clara." I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. For years, I had begged for their love, their attention, their kindness. Now, they were asking for mine. But the person they had ignored, mistreated, and underestimated no longer existed. I was someone new, someone stronger. I decided to send a single check, enough to keep them afloat for a few months, with a note attached. "This is the last time. I wish you well, but I can't be part of this anymore." It was my final act of closure, a clean break that left no room for lingering guilt. Time continued to pass, and news of my family's struggles came less and less frequently. I learned through Lena that Clara had moved to a remote town, working a menial job to make ends meet. My parents, now frail and aging, relied on the charity of distant relatives and neighbors. Lucas had disappeared entirely, a ghost of the past I no longer cared to chase. One day, as I stood on stage at an international conference, presenting the culmination of years of research, I caught a glimpse of someone familiar in the audience. It was my mother. Her hair was gray, her posture hunched, but her eyes were unmistakable. After the presentation, I found her waiting in the lobby. She approached me cautiously, her hands trembling. "Mia," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. I didn't want to interrupt, but I needed to see you. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "We've made mistakes," she said, her voice cracking. "I've made mistakes. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." It was the first time I had ever heard those words from her, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "Thank you, but it's too late for apologies." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand." I walked away, leaving her standing there in the lobby. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The ties that had bound me to my past were finally severed. That night, as I sat with Ethan on the balcony of our apartment, looking out at the city lights, I realized something important. Forgiveness didn't mean opening old wounds or letting toxic people back into my life. Forgiveness meant letting go for my own sake, not theirs. The days following my mother's appearance at the conference were quiet. I didn't tell Ethan about the encounter immediately. There wasn't much to sit, wasn't a confrontation, nor was it a reconciliation. It was simply an acknowledgement that the people who once loomed so large in my life were no longer part of my story. Instead, I buried myself in my work. My research was nearing completion, and the results promised to be groundbreaking. Awards, recognition, and opportunities poured in, but they were mere milestones. For the first time, my accomplishments felt like they were entirely mine in a desperate attempt to gain anyone's approval. One evening, Ethan and I hosted a small dinner party for a few close friends. As laughter and conversation filled our home, I realized how different my life had become. Gone were the days of walking on eggshells, of feeling like an outsider in my own space. Here, I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me. After everyone left, Ethan stood by the sink, washing dishes while I tidied up. "You seemed distracted tonight," he said casually. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment before responding. "My mom came to my conference last week." He paused, turning to face me. "Your mom?" I nodded. "She said she was proud of me." "That's it. No demands, no guilt trips, just that." Ethan set down the dish he was holding and walked over to me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," I admitted. It felt strange, like she wanted to make amends, but I can't let her back in. "I've moved on." "That's okay," he said softly. "You don't owe anyone access to your life, no matter what they say." I smiled, leaning into him. Ethan had a way of making everything feel simpler, less overwhelming. "Thank you," I whispered. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to an alumni event at my old university. At first, I was reluctant to go, felt too much like stepping back into a past I had no interest in revisiting. But Ethan encouraged me. "Go," he said with a grin. "Show them how far you've come." And so I went. The event was held in a grand hall on campus, filled with familiar faces from my undergraduate years. Professors, classmates, and even a few old friends greeted me warmly, marveling at my accomplishments. Toward the end of the evening, as I sipped a glass of wine and listened to a speaker at the podium, a familiar voice broke through the hum of the crowd. "Mia." I turned to see Lena, my oldest friend, standing there with a wide smile. "Lena," I exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she teased. "But seriously, it's good to see you." We spent the rest of the evening catching up, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of where life had taken us. For the first time, I felt truly at peace. Discussing my past, it wasn't a source of pain anymore. Just a series of lessons that had shaped me. As the night drew to a close, Lena said something that stuck with me. "You know, Mia, I always admired you. Even when things were hard, you never gave up, you kept fighting." I smiled, the words warming my heart. "Thanks, Lena. I think I just finally realized what was worth fighting for." Back at home, as I curled up on the couch with Ethan, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of my past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life filled with love, purpose, and fulfillment, a life that was truly my own. Chapter 7: A New Dawn. 2 years later, the life I had built felt more solid than I ever could have imagined. My research had earned international acclaim, and my work was making a real impact. Ethan and I had moved into a bright, open apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the morning. Suna. Perfect metaphor for the life I had claimed for myself. One crisp autumn morning, as I sat by the window with my coffee, scrolling through emails, one subject line caught my attention. Family reunion invitation. I clicked it reluctantly, expecting the usual plea for money or reconciliation. Instead, it was a message from a distant cousin organizing a gathering for all extended family members. "Hi Mia, I'm reaching out because we're planning a reunion for everyone. I closed my laptop and stared out the window. The thought of seeing my parents or Clara again didn't fill me with dread anymore. It simply felt unnecessary. They were a part of my past, not my present or my future. The reunion came and went without my attendance, and I felt no guilt. Instead, Ethan and I spent that weekend hiking in the mountains, surrounded by golden leaves and crisp air. As we reached the summit, I looked out at the sprawling view below, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Ethan took my hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his warm brown eyes searching mine. I smiled. "About how far I've come. How much I've let go." He squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mia, for everything." His words stayed with me as we descended the mountain, the sun setting in brilliant hues of orange and pink. For the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered from my past. Months later, as I prepared for a keynote speech at an international conference, I received another letter. This time it was from my father. The handwriting was shaky, the words scrawled with a sense of urgency. "Mia, this will likely be the last time you hear from me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you've found happiness. I've made so many mistakes, and not a day goes by that I don't regret the way I treated you. Take care of yourself, always." Dad, I read the letter twice, my emotions swirling. But instead of pain or anger, I felt a quiet sense of closure. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a box of keepsakes, things that had shaped me but no longer controlled me. On the day of my keynote speech, the auditorium was packed with eager faces. I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warming my skin, and looked out at the crowd. For a moment I thought of Clara, my parents, and even Lucas, not with bitterness, but with peace. "Good morning," I began, my voice strong and clear. "Today, I want to talk about resilience, not just in science, but in life." The audience listened intently as I shared my journey, not just as a researcher but as a person who had fought to find her place in the world. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing in the vast space. As I stepped off the stage, Ethan was waiting for me, his smile wide and proud. "You were incredible," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Thank you," I whispered, my heart full. Later that evening, as we walked through the city, the streetlights casting a golden glow, I reflected on the life I had built. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had learned to let go of the pain, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own happiness. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was free, and my future was mine to shape. As the stars twinkled above, I smiled, knowing that I had finally found my place in the world, a place of light, love, and boundless possibilities. The end. Subscribe and like for more enjoyable content.